Just like this.
Hi, everyone. My name is Bree Newland, and I am the Academic Director of Undergraduate Programs at the Tisch Institute of Global Sport at New York University. And I'm delighted to be the moderator today for our Health Equity Moonshot. With me on the stage, I have Ramsey Alwyn, who is the President and CEO of the National Council on Aging. I have Erin Hume, who is the Director of Global Philanthropy at the World Health Organization Foundation. I have Sabine Huck, CEO of Doctors, and I have Geraldine Ritter, the Executive Vice President of External Affairs and ESG for Organon. So welcome, everyone. All right, so to get started today, got a whole bunch of papers here that I want to get out of my way. What I thought I'd start with is for you guys to give me one or two words or a very short phrase that keeps you up at night when you think about the healthcare needs of women.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me. At the National Council on Aging, we are focused like a laser beam on making sure the gift of longevity that women around the globe are experiencing ensures quality of years, not just quantity of years. When you look at the medical and technological breakthroughs of the last century, it's amazing. Women on the U.S., on average, living to be 81. Asian women, European women living to 87 or 90. But will those be quality, healthy years?
So 2 words. Mine would be urgency and generosity. People have immense power and have a generous spirit. Over $500 billion is spent every year in charitable giving just in the U.S. alone. If we actually put that to work for women and girls, right now it's only 1 to 2% of that is going to women and girls issues, and the health portion of that is even smaller. We need to make the issue urgent and unlock that generosity.
Great, thank you. I'm happy to be here as well. For me, it's driving a gender-inclusive workforce in relation to healthcare.
So I'll give you one word, pain. Pain. I'll say it twice. And from a personal perspective, I'm a polytrauma survivor, so it literally keeps me up at night. But much more importantly, it's incredibly shocking in this day and age, the extent to which women's pain, girls' pain is still dismissed, still undertreated, still not regarded with the same seriousness and sensitivity as men's pain. And the ramifications of that are tremendous.
Thank you. Keeping with that, Geraldine, because I think there's a common thread with not only pain, but a lot of women's issues. We know that women are less likely to serve in clinical trials. There's less research focused specifically on them, and we're not little men, right? We don't fit into a nice little smaller compartment of what we learned about men. So, what is lacking in terms of, in your mind, women-specific research, and what can we do to, put more effort into interest and spending and all of the things that we need in this area?
Yeah, we really have to be very specific because too many research dollars are wasted, right? But there were 37 new drugs approved by the US FDA last year. 2 were for conditions unique to women. And when we think about conditions that cause women enormous suffering and really have an impact on their lives, there's been decades of very little research and very little innovation. Endometriosis, polycystic ovary syndrome, serious menopause symptoms, preterm labor. You can go on and you say, why on earth, when so many women suffer, do we have nothing in the pipeline? So we are trying to rectify that. We've purchased 8 companies in our 18 months of existence to try to fill our pipeline and do some of that research. But it does take time, and nobody can do it alone, certainly.
Anything else like to add?
Well, I would just add to the important point about clinical trials. and including women, it has to be all ages and all life stages as well. It's so important. As we age, we experience things differently. And so it's essential that women are around the table, whether it be the boardroom or the clinical trials. All ages, all stages really will help inform the design and the efficacy of interventions, whether they be self-managed care. At the National Council on Aging, we do a lot of work around chronic disease self-management and what's possible in regard to food and nutrition and exercise, making sure there's extra intentionality about what works for women and for women as we age and at every life stage is just so important.
And I think I just wanted to add in, to piggyback on that, it's not just research. I mean, if we look at during COVID, we had PPE that was designed one size fits all for men, and it didn't work for women. The reinfection rates were, enormous, and 70% of your frontline workforce were women. And so, so we need more women in that conversation in designing the interventions, definitely across the board.
I mean, this is saying putting an equity on all that we do, putting an equity lens on everything. I think philanthropy has a huge role to play in this. There are oftentimes large foundations that are investing in upstream research, or be it looking at all forms of capital, impact investing and everything, and the type of companies you're talking about, of saying, like, how do we actually make sure we're serving the populations that we're saying we're trying to serve? There is a huge responsibility in addition to the immense generosity of actually spending money on women and girls in philanthropy. All philanthropists should really be looking at putting a gender lens on all that they do. So I was most recently at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and we're trying to set the norm. They were trying to set the norm and build kind of a philanthropic muscle in the philanthropic ecosystem of saying, put a gender lens on everything. And the global health team, which is really responsible for investing in R&D, were like, that doesn't apply to us. We're gender neutral. We're investing in science. And it's more about asking the hard questions of the people who are making important decisions of where funding is going. And it's not just philanthropy, but then going out and using your voice as a philanthropist, or using your voice to advocate for government funding, which is much larger, to then say you need to be putting a gender lens on everything you're doing. So yeah.
Can I follow up on that 1 second? I want to tell you all a story, and I heard this from our head of investor relations. So we're a women's health company. We have a lot of women's health products, but we also have some other products that are not women's health oriented. And guess which ones we get the questions about from investors? Let's talk about biosimilars. Let's talk about your established brands. And our head of investor relations said to me, she said, you know what? I asked one of our investors who's a friend, why don't you ever ask me about women's health? This is the pipeline we're growing. These are the products that are growing. He said, I have no idea what to ask you. and this person was an active investor. But to your point, it's not well understood, and folks shy away from it, even when making or having made important decisions to invest. Anyway, I thought that anecdote was telling.
Yeah, it's really interesting too. Like, I serve on the board, a board called of a company called iGiant, and the goal is for gender equity across a whole bunch of stuff. And where it fits in with what I do is, it's quite interesting how, like, I'm a woodworker. I cannot find any woodworking tools that fit my hand. They don't think about women ever doing that, right? We have the first couple of new pairs of running shoes that were specifically designed for women. We have different bodies. We have different angles in our bodies, right? And that's just now starting to happen. We have never had crash test dummies to test car crashes with women dummies. That has just been made. There are so many things that tie into the fact that, again, most of the people designing these studies are men, and they're not women at the table talking about these issues. I don't know about you, but I'm a petite woman. Seat belts in the car for me don't ever work. I'm too short. I can't see over my steering wheel often. So there's a lot of things that tie into all the stuff that we're talking about that are really related to fully understanding it from a holistic point of view, not just from a medical point of view. But I'd like to switch into more medicine here. Geraldine, going back to you, one of the things that helps women grow and be able to do the things they want to do with their lives is the ability to choose when and if they want to have a family. And so, can you talk to me about how contraceptive access ensures gender equity, and how can we avoid discrimination when we think about this access?
I am thrilled with the question. I believe that one of the most impactful things we can do, one of the best buys out there in public health to help women achieve their potential is access to contraception and access to the contraceptive of their choice. And in many countries, contraceptives are widely available. They're not, the uptake isn't there for cultural barriers, social barriers. Sometimes financial barriers are important, but many times those are not primary. And we know that when a woman is, or a girl, becomes pregnant in her mid-teens, her body very often isn't ready. Emotionally, she's not ready. Very rarely financially is she ready. And, it's so common in so many countries that women have multiple children before they're 20. The thought of higher education, going to school, is not realistic. And even in the U.S., in what I consider a really tragic post-Roe environment, we need to be doubly leaning in on access to contraception. That ought to be something we can all agree on, regardless of your opinion on the Supreme Court case. So that's a real focus. I truly believe that is a great equalizer. It's a great equalizer for women's financial potential, educational potential, health potential, has this incredible ripple effect on the woman's other children, on her entire family, on her ability to contribute productively to the community. Absolutely have children, have your family when it's right for you.
So I can add a perspective from certain developing countries, frontier markets, and South Asian markets especially. Many times women don't have a say in matters of their own health, right? And, the stats say 48%, but it's actually much, much higher than that. When we speak about contraception in some South Asian markets, there is a lot of taboo around it. It could be social, cultural, and religious. I live in Pakistan, and officially, a woman is not supposed to, doctors don't perform internal exams on women until they're married. Contraception is not something officially you're supposed to be prescribed by a doctor until you're married, and it's even then with your husband's consent, right? So there's not awareness even about reproductive health or contraception for girls as they're growing up in schools. And this is across the board in many of these countries. Now, we do work around it. We have frontline health workers who go door to door, and they're providing access to women on contraception. There's a lot of agencies working around it, but in those markets, we have to be very creative. And it's access to contraception, and it's also providing access to safe abortions. That's another issue that we face because women go through great lengths when they're in a position and they need to, take action, and they don't often have access to resources. And so a lot of our work is not only advocacy, but really creating awareness and making sure that women are aware of different resources that are available to them.
Yeah, once again, I have the philanthropy lens on this. But picking up that point of oftentimes women don't have the power to choose. Oftentimes they have to have, the consent of their husband. And so this is where philanthropy said, actually, okay, so end user, like, how do we meet the need of the woman, right? And so, again, the Gates Foundation and partnered with PATH and other partners to look at Cyanopress, which is a subcutaneous injection that lasts for 3 months. Because women, to take a pill or to go to the doctor frequently or whatnot to actually get these medicines, it's all of a sudden it's a huge issue. It's a huge barrier to access. And so being able to actually just have a very easy injection, they don't even have to tell their husband. These are the type of interventions where philanthropy can play a role in creating the research and development around it. But then also, they actually went even further and did like some impact investing where they actually did a volume guarantee. They actually volume guaranteed it with the pharma company, saying like, we will ensure there's a market for you. And if there isn't, we will just give you a huge check, basically, right? So these are the powers of where like philanthropy can play a really catalytic role in making sure that the end user is at the center, and then you get the private sector on board, you get governments on board, et cetera.
It's a really great example.
And it's so important when we talk about aging well, we believe it means living well, that women have options at all life stages available to them. The implications of these types of challenges to access to contraception can have a lifetime financial impact on women. So we're very much so supportive of affordable, accessible reproductive health, family planning, and we'd like to see the attention on contraception pulled through to a woman's entire life course. Our reproductive health is critically important throughout our entire life course. When was the last time you talked with your girlfriends about menopause? How comfortable was your doctor talking with you about menopause? It's so essential that we're looking at all of a woman's reproductive health and well-being across her life course. And just one example of how this plays out when we somehow sort of put our future self, older women, out to pasture and don't come to the top of mind when we're looking at these issues. The Sustainable Development Goals, such a critical tool on the global stage, looking at poverty, health, education. Well, did you know until recently the Sustainable Development Goals only tracked women through childbearing years? Post-childbearing years, the SDGs were not counting women when it came to incidences of violence, poverty, education, and health needs. Only more recently, the Titchfield Group and other advocates, such as the National Council on Aging, have brought to the forefront how problematic it is for us to not look at women throughout our entire health course and our entire life course, ultimately. So just an aha moment for how important it is when we think about reproductive health and family planning issues to think holistically about our whole selves, all ages and all stages.
So just to piggyback, and I started by saying, my thing that keeps me up is gender equality in healthcare. We've all read these stats and we've seen that, women deliver, men lead, men design. Well, what does that mean? 70% of our global health workforce are women, right? 70%. And I think it's more. We report 70%. But only 25% of women go into senior leadership positions. So that's where they can affect policy and programming and design healthcare. So, we're sitting here and we're saying, wow, we're surprised, but why are we surprised? There's no women there. I mean, if we're not at that table, we're not involved in those conversations, and that's absurd that 25% women are there, but yet who's designing healthcare for women then, right? I mean, we really need to, for me, I think it's going back to that root cause and getting more women and promoting more women into leadership in the healthcare system, because we need them to help, I think, across the board at all levels. Do you want to add anything?
One quick comment. I loved your point because addressing that intersectionality between sexual and reproductive health over a woman's lifespan across women's different cultural and social situations. One group I'd like to just highlight near and dear to my heart is the disability community, and almost completely ignored in terms of sexual and reproductive health needs. There was a recent academic article out, and the statistics were really tragic. Were really, really tragic. We tend to think of disabled people as asexual beings, and that's so unfair.
That's a great point.
Erin, did you have, no? Okay, great. Ramsey, I'd like to start with you on this one. what are the key, so you mentioned some of, the lifespan and the things we need to think about, but what are the key areas we need to really be thinking about as women age, and what's most neglected in your mind?
Well, what we see up close and personal at the National Council on Aging, where every day we're working with thousands of community-based organizations to really improve the health and economic security of older adults, especially women, is those struggling with chronic conditions. 80% of those over 60 have 2 or more chronic conditions: hypertension, diabetes, obesity. These are issues that actually, with basic food and nutrition, exercise and diet, and mental health and wellness, we can really bend the curve. Yet the payers don't necessarily pay for the preventive care necessary. At NCOA, we administered 5 national resource centers on behalf of the Department of Health and Human Services, one of which is the Chronic Disease Self-Management Resource Center, where we certify all evidence-based health promotion and disease prevention programs that, once certified as evidence-based, will be reimbursable by Medicare and Medicaid. There is zero intentionality in terms of a woman's lived experience, a woman's needs when it comes to these, because they've been gender neutral. And so I see a real opportunity, a real need for there to be more interventions that are thoughtful and culturally responsive and responsive to the lived experience of women, and then for there also for that to pull through in terms of the payers and the financing that can support really bending the curve on those chronic conditions, because they're costly. We've done some novel research with the University of Massachusetts Boston's Gerontology Institute. There are real costs. There are medical costs, non-medical costs, and loss of wages and productivity when individuals are navigating these chronic conditions, and disproportionately women doing so.
Yeah, to tie into that, my research looks at women's physical activity and sport participation across their lifespan, and I see issues on both sides of that. Kind of tied to what you just said. At the young age, we in the United States especially, we see young girls start to drop out of sport around 11 years old, and that has severe consequences on their self-confidence, their self-esteem, and also their physical well-being and mental well-being, because we know that sport and physical activity has a really strong impact on health. And then fast forward to the other end of the spectrum, because we lost them so early, that just ties into the health issues that they begin to experience then throughout their lifespan. And it's interesting, some women I've studied come in and pick up sport in their 30s after their children are a little bit older, and it's fantastic to see them talk about how their health has changed and their wellness has changed. So I certainly see that, and then it has lasting impacts into their senior years. And so it's interesting that you say, I think that your point is well taken across everywhere, not just related specifically to medicine and health, but also what we're seeing in physical activity and exercise and sport participation as well. So I'm so glad to hear the work that you're trying to do as well to support that. Based on that, I'd like to flip it just a smidge to thinking about health in terms of more traditional household responsibilities. And so we know that women have more traditional household responsibility related to food choices and preparing foods, and we know that women in lower socioeconomic situations have poor access to nutritious foods, and that impacts their own health, the health of their family, the habits that their family develops, and then that then has a profound impact on the medical system as we see people having issues with obesity and all the other chronic issues that happen with poor nutritious decisions. What can we do to better support women in this space?
Well, this is probably not where you're going with this, but what it brought up for me is actually women in crises. So women actually who are in emergency zones, who are actually in humanitarian crises. So they're often the ones that are the most disproportionately affected by war, by health or in natural disasters, etc. Because they're then taking care of the children, and they're making sure that the children are getting the nutrition and they put themselves second, etc. One thing we need to do is make the invisible visible. For example, right now there are over 70 million people in the Horn of Africa and Sahel that are in a drought crisis, and they're facing a famine. It's not technically a famine yet, but it's a hunger crisis. And between hunger and death, there's often disease. And so the WHO and other health responders are on the ground responding, getting those basic nutrition pieces to where they need it most. But the funding isn't there. The advocacy isn't there. The visibility of the crisis is not there. There was an overwhelming amount of generosity during both the pandemic and then also when Russia invaded Ukraine. People came out in droves and with generosity from $2 to hundreds of millions, right? We need to make the same level of attention to this crisis as we did those other crises. And so I think we have a responsibility to support the women who are facing these dire needs, who are leaving their homes because of drought. Their cattle have, died. Their livelihoods are gone, and they are putting their children, before themselves. And we have a responsibility to say we need to support those that are in those deep crises.
So we're a part of the Food is Medicine movement with a real recognition of the critical role of food and nutrition when it comes to those chronic conditions as we age. And we're pleased to have been a part of the White House Conference on Hunger, Nutrition, and Health that happened a few months ago. And it's of note that it was the first in over 50 years, the first conference with a real thoughtful approach and a linkage of hunger and nutrition and health. I mean, we need a holistic plan and understanding that food is medicine. It's a part of the the public health strategy, and we need to facilitate the financing of it. That's so often what we see in our work with millions of older adults. Over 6 million older adults received services and experienced a measurable improvement in their health and economic security from the National Council on Aging last year. 95% were low income, over 70% were women, over 40% individuals of color. And the bottom line is those individuals, they're making sacrifices between food and medicine on a daily basis. It's not that they don't know what the right choices are, the resources are limited. So that interplay between our health and our nutrition and our financial stability as women, when we experience a lifetime of cumulative disadvantage, we're more likely to be in those jobs with lower wages, pay inequity, time off for caregiving. That all adds up. And what we see later in life is that results in health insecurity and aging into poverty. So it is quite dire and urgent when you connect all of those dots.
I'd like to add something. It's a little bit, it's a departure from what the food, but I wanted to piggyback off of the catastrophic kind of emergencies. And actually, when we speak about, developing programs for women, we have to meet them where they're at. I remember in COVID, we had an agency that wanted us to, we have access to 3,000 frontline health workers. So there was an agency that wanted us to go out and teach women hand hygiene. And it was in an area where they don't have access to water, right? And we said, yeah, go on out, go. And so there's pictures, and they're teaching. It's lovely pictures, and these women in these huts, and they're wearing masks, and they don't have access to water, right? So we really have to be, and that's why I think having people on the ground, and I'm sure, using the right implementing partners, but also during catastrophic emergencies, I think another thing that's so important, and I just wanted to mention, is access to female hygiene. Right, and I know when we think of support and we send out food, that's something that's often left, And I just wanted to remind everyone that please just be have that in your mind as well, because I think on the ground that's something that's always missed out, and we're constantly trying to provide women access to menstruation hygiene, and hygiene products, and so that's often just left out. And I just wanted to mention that.
It brings to mind as we're a spinoff from a larger company, Merck. So we are I like to call us a startup at scale at Organon. We're a brand new company, but in 140 countries with 10,000 employees. And as we were thinking about how to create, how to brand and identify this new company, you know, you kept talking about women's health. But as soon as you use those words in that order, you're medicalizing a lot, or people instantly think, ooh, sexual and reproductive stuff, you know? And we're all more than a uterus, right? And so we try to discipline ourselves and say, no, it's the health of women. It's the health of women. And sometimes I still fall back into it and talk about women's health. But if we truly flip that, every single thing we've just talked about comes a little more naturally, and trying to have that discipline and recognizing that truly supporting the health of women requires so much more than access to a pill or access to a doctor. Those are important, but they're not even maybe half the story.
Yes, and Erin, you mentioned, something in your comment about women putting themselves last. And so I think that ties really closely to what I'd like to discuss, the last point, which is mental health. In the U.S. especially, we see there's still quite, I think probably globally, let's not even say U.S., there's a stigma around mental health, right? We don't talk about it enough. It's not researched enough. It's not open. And in women in particular, there's this additional burden of being able to do it all, right? We need to work. We have to raise our children. We have to be there for everybody. And usually everybody's needs comes before ours. What are some of the issues you all are seeing in terms of mental health, and where should we be focusing, or what should we be doing?
I can start. I think I guess I won't purport to say where I think we should focus overall, but one area of focus really has to be destigmatizing talking about women's health in the workplace. I think that is one of the places where the stigma can be strongest, because we all want to show up as our best selves and present ourselves as omnicompetent. And there's this sense that if I'm somewhat less, or I'm prone to bouts of depression or anxiety, I'm going to be seen as less competent. So from a personal perspective, one thing, having been hit by a train, I did go through a period of depression and PTSD. And at my company, I try to be really vocal about that, because I report to the CEO. If I can't say I went through a long period of depression, I went through PTSD, I went through opioid dependence, who in the company can? And you don't have to be hit by a train. We all go through something at some point. So I've done talks in the company where I've said, raise your hand if you've never lost somebody close to you, if you've never had a relationship disrupted, if you've never faced a massive, on and on and on. And of course, by the end, everybody's raising, nobody's raising their hand. And I said, don't think about mental health as for somebody else. It's all of us. And I think COVID really proved both the need for companies to be much more sensitive if they want to retain employees and have them be as productive as possible, to pay more attention to mental health, to normalize seeking treatment for mental health. But we've still got a long way to go.
Yeah, I'll pick up on the workplace. The WHO recently issued some guidelines around, mental health in the workplace. Because to all the points you just elaborated of, like, kind of what's the best in class of what companies should be doing, and a little bit of a plug, if anybody wants to help, like, putting those guidelines to work, I mean, we would love to talk to you. And I think there needs to be a gender lens on that. And that's also not acknowledging that in a lot of countries, the majority of women are not in the formalized sector. Right? It's informal work. It's care work. It's they might be smallholder farmers. So I think we also need to address, how do we reach those women who don't have access? They're not in a formalized setting. How do we make sure that they have access to mental health? And even talking about it in these contexts, I don't think we've even scratched the surface of being able to address that in a lot of these different markets.
I was just going to say one good thing, there aren't very many, that came out of COVID, though, is I think at least in some countries, certainly in the US, the broader acceptability of telehealth. And if you name one profession, it's not perfect, but where you can deliver really quality medical care virtually, it's in psychiatry. And, I would love to see that trend grow. Certainly now it's much better reimbursed than it used to be. But I'm hopeful that, again, it's not everywhere. It's not the answer to everything. But it's a good step in the right direction.
So I can speak from the perspective of healthcare providers. Something we're doing in Asia is training our primary care doctors on mental health first aid. And we've been doing that with our frontline health workers as well, because often it's missed. It's body pain or it's something else. And actually, when we probe more and we find out, it could be related to mental health. And I've started seeing companies having people trained in mental health first aid as well. It could be people in HR or senior managers or just a broad range of employees who are mental health champions. And I think that really does help us because, often we miss the signs and it's in front of us. And if we can start recognizing it more, I think that will help address it as well.
And just to dovetail with that, we've done something similar with the Aging Network professionals, trying to normalize and chip away the stigma that not feeling okay is not a normal part of aging. As women, often we think this is a part of aging, maybe it's cognitive decline. No, it doesn't have to be. And so we've launched trainings with the vast network of tens of thousands of community-based organizations that are so often providing services in community. We've partnered with federal agencies on an annual event called the Older Americans Mental Health and Wellness Day Symposium, and we're bringing in people that are telling their story. So last year, Jane Pauley, the news anchor, she told her story of her bipolar mental health and wellness journey. And she talks about it as a journey. It's ongoing. And she shares that her doctors, her publicists, told her to just sort of dismiss some of the symptoms. And as a woman, she was told, just try to put it to the background. And so I just think there's a lot of room for us all to chip away at the stigma, to get a greater education and awareness of the true symptoms and that there are solutions. And so our part of the equation is to arm that network of aging network professionals to better understand and then diagnose and triage. But then we need to have the workforce on the other end to be able to provide the support and services, which in the US, there's a real workforce challenge in terms of professionals that are able to support, and globally.
All right, so as we close, what else can we do to make a health equality moonshot a reality?
Well, I just would like to echo what others have shared in terms of getting women around the table. All ages, all life stages. We need young women, we need older women, we need women as the investors, as the trustees, at the table designing and training so that we can have a better understanding of what women really need. And we need women with lived experience around that table.
Yes, and we need more investment here. We need to shine a light on where women are invisible, where our issues are invisible, and we need not 2% of philanthropy going here, but 50 to 80%. And then for all of those that are giving generously, ask yourself the hard questions, right? It's just asking questions. That all gender lenses, like, how does this affect women? How will this investment I'm doing? I mean, investments in the private sector should have a gender lens on everything we're doing. That's another thing that the WHO Foundation, we're doing impact investing and putting a gender lens on everything and asking the hard questions of how this impacts women. Are there women on boards of these companies? Are the women in the leadership role? Et cetera. So I would just say, look at every form of capital and how can we put a gender lens on it, and I think that will shift the norm.
Great. I want to piggyback on what you were saying. We do need more women in the health workforce. We were on a panel yesterday, and I stated a stat that currently women are contributing $3 trillion to the global health workforce. So that's approximately 5% of our GDP. But you know what? Only 50% of that is paid work. That means our healthcare system is relying on unpaid work. And I want to interject with a little story here. During 2020 and 22, my mother took care of my dad for 2 years as his caregiver, and they live in Canada, one of the best, systems in the world. But there was, the system was burdened and it was ineffective. My dad passed away in August. My mother died 27 days later. And she, I think, worked about 16,000 hours of unpaid work. That's, and this isn't in Canada, can you imagine what that's like in other countries? So we do have a healthcare issue. We expect, I think the number is 18 million more healthcare providers that we need to fill the gap by 2030. Women are there, but they're excluded, they're underemployed, and they're invisible. So we need to bring back those women to work, to have supportive workplaces where we can bring these women back to work, because women are there, they're just excluded from the workforce. So that's my, message.
And I'll just echo what my colleagues have said. You guys have really hit the nail on the head. And I think we just have to keep at it. And it's more than just representation. It's not enough just to be in the room. We've got to raise our voice. We've got to speak out. We shouldn't be grateful for being in the room. We deserve to be there. We have to demand to be there. And you look at all these global forums and, the last COP conference, right? Lots of articles, 75% of the attendees are men. Many of the delegations, 90% men. Who suffers most from climate change? Women. There's a big difference, I'm sorry to say, in the gender makeup of those that have the white badges at Davos and those that do not. And so we've got to be at the table. Women have got to be on those boards. Women have got to be recognized day in, day out in the workforce, and we have to keep at it.
Well, thank you, ladies. If you'd like to continue the conversation online using the hashtag Equality Moonshot, we invite you to do that. And also, please include the handle at World Women Fund when you do post so that we can follow and join in on that conversation. I'd like to thank my guest panelists here. Thank you so much for your time today and your wisdom and your efforts to helping women and raising women up. I really appreciate it. And it was an honor to have this conversation with you today. Thank you.